Welcome to another episode of the Doctors Building Wealth podcast. Kenji and I are so excited to be here coming to you today from Lake Como in Italy. And how fitting is it that the topic of this podcast this week is going international, buying an Italian villa. Now, I wanted to give you a little bit of context about this. So back when Kenji and I were deciding to start investing in real estate and become real estate investors and put all of our money into buying investment properties that would make us money, one of our goals, besides our cash flow goal, was to create this life where we were able to own an Italian villa that we would use as a gathering place, because we really wanted to be able to host our friends and our family and have people be able to stay with us, have enough space to house people, but also have people be able to stay with us as long as they wanted to, which was really meant that we needed to not only get financially free ourselves, but we needed our friends to be financially free as well.
But before we get started, if you want to watch this video on YouTube, go to our YouTube channel, Semi-Retired Life, and you can see the beautiful background right on Lake Como. It's an incredible spot here. And now so many of our friends and also members of our real estate community are building real estate portfolios so that they can go out and create lives they love.
And yeah, we see people now buying international rentals and then taking prolonged trips with their families. And it's really gratifying to see people be able to make that dream a reality. And so we wanted to talk to you today about how we're making our dream a reality, and then how other people are also going out and buying international short-term rentals and being able to not only live this life of travel, but have multiple properties around the world where they're able to rent them out and make income, but also have a place for their family to go.
So why go international? Why should somebody go out and buy a rental property so far from home? Some people are going international to get a golden visa. And if you don't know what a golden visa is, it's when you can get citizenship or residency after you make an investment in the country. And this could be starting a business or maybe buying some real estate.
Yeah, a couple of people from our community have gone into Portugal, for example, and put money down and bought enough short-term rentals to be able to meet the requirements for the golden visa. But there are other countries that you can do this as well.
And one of the benefits of that is that you're not restricted to a certain number of days in a country. If you want to spend, let's say, more than 90 days in Italy, then you can do that.
And if you want to actually use some of the resources of that area, for example, enroll your kid in school or even access to healthcare, if you're a citizen, because you've gotten that golden visa, you now have options to be able to live there permanently, or your kids can live there permanently down the road. Some are also buying rental properties as geographic arbitrage. You can imagine if you're going and you're buying a beach house, for example, in a place that's very expensive in the United States, how that compares to going to Ecuador or another country where prices are really depressed, and you're able to buy a property at a fraction of the cost and still have that lifestyle that you're looking forward to part-time now and maybe even full-time later when you go into retirement. And some are doing it for currency arbitrage reasons too. I know one of the things that was really remarkable when we were looking for our Italian villa last summer is the euro and the dollar were about 1-to-1. And at that point, if I had found a property that really worked with the numbers and I had purchased it, and maybe I had even been able to use a lot of cash to be able to purchase it, I would have gotten a 20% discount if you think about the fact that normally the euro isn't about $1.20 value compared to the dollar.
Another potential benefit of going international is diversification. And we talk a lot about diversification and concentration risk. Concentration risk is when you are too concentrated in one area. And we think of it as investing in different states, but you can also think of it as investing internationally in multiple different countries in order to diversify.
Yeah, think about the fact that, let's say the US economy takes a big hit. If you own all real estate or you own all stocks in the US economy, and that's the only currency you have, you are going to take a hit as well. But if you own rental properties in multiple different countries across the world, you now have properties that are maybe even improving despite what's going on with your portfolio in the United States.
And for us, we're going international because we've always envisioned a life where we're not geographically restricted, where we would live in multiple different places all throughout the year.
So by that, we mean that we're going to actually have home bases in multiple different countries. And we already have home bases in some different states with our short-term rentals, but this would just expand those opportunities for us to spend part of the year in different locations and travel and live a life where we're not just in one place all the time.
So now we wanted to shift to sharing our experience going international and the process of buying a property.
Yeah, and the first process to overcome was thinking about the price and thinking about how to get a loan. So when we first started, I spoke to a number of different agents in Italy, and a number of them told me you can't get a loan here. It's just as an American national coming in, there aren't any banks that are going to be able to help you. Everybody buys cash. And so when I heard that a couple of years ago, I was kind of disappointed. I was thinking, okay, well, I'm going to have to save up a certain amount of cash, so it's really going to limit what I'm going to be able to buy. It's not really what I had envisioned when I had my dream board or my thoughts in my head, but that's going to be the reality. So I was looking within a price range, but then I realized that might have been a limiting belief, and it was a limiting belief of the agents that I was taking on without fully exploring whether or not it was true. And so then I went out and started just asking people if they knew anyone who could get me a loan in Italy. And what I found out is people in our community in Portugal were being able to get loans. I actually, through some connections, got a guy who could give me a loan in Spain and Portugal, which wasn't quite what I needed, but it was great. Found out a contact in Mexico who could give me a loan in Mexico, but also didn't need that. And then finally, just through a chance meeting, walking by somebody at breakfast in our community who lives part-time in Italy, she was able to find me a lawyer who's based in the United States, but used to live in Italy, who actually helps people who are based in the United States to be able to secure loans and also be able to negotiate the whole process and work through the whole process of purchasing a property as a United States citizen living in the US, but buying a property in Italy.
Yeah. So even if you think you can't get a loan or you have all these people telling you that it's impossible, if you just go and explore, talk to people, network, build relationships, there's almost always a way to figure out an answer to a challenging problem.
Yeah, in fact, when I think about Costa Rica, for example, one of our agent contacts down there has just found a bank that now has decided to be able to give loans to people who are foreign nationals. And so things can change over time too. So even if it's not the case today that you can find anyone to give you a loan, it may not be the case a year from now. So just continue to push and continue to explore. Now, now I have the potential to secure a loan, but I still wanted a property that was a little bit bigger than I could see that we were going to have the money for, because in Italy, there are such high costs associated with purchasing property. It usually adds about 10 to 12% onto the purchase price. So it's quite significant. So the next challenge I kind of was facing, well, it was, how am I going to be able to find a property that's far outside of our price range and be able to buy it? Now, most people would have stopped there and said, well, it's not, it can't be done. Let me just stick in what I can afford in our price range. But I actually decided to walk around and ask people. So I literally walked around and asked people like, hey, I want to buy this size Italian villa it's going to cost this much money. Do you have any ideas how I could do it? And out of that came a lot of really cool things.
Yeah, I remember Leti was asking everybody, including our asset protection lawyers, our accountants, basically anybody who could offer some suggestions, ideas, and yeah, through all those conversations, you figured out a way.
Yeah, I cobbled it together. It was really remarkable how different people would have different ideas that kind of fit together in this little piece of a puzzle. And I talked to, multiple people and people who I never knew if they would have any resources, but I thought at least I'd run it by them. And you would be surprised how engaged people would be in trying to help be thought partners for me. And so what I landed on is this really cool structure that I've never seen done before. And I have to give credit to our CPA and our asset protection firm for really helping get a lot of the pieces in place that we really needed to kind of come up with this idea. But it's basically a syndication structure for a foreign property. And I think it's really cool structure because it's something that a lot of people in our community could potentially even use themselves. If you're not able to get a loan, but you have a property that you've identified that's going to be a really great investment, actually raise money from US based investors to be able to buy this property in another country.
Yeah, so just imagine buying the property that you really want now, as opposed to waiting until sometime down the line when you think you can actually afford it.
Yeah, so I want to talk about the structure in a little bit more detail. So the idea is that let's say you need $1 million to go buy a property and you can't get a loan. Well, in that case, you could cobble together, let's say 10 investors who are putting in $100,000 each to be able to buy that property. And for that $100,000 each, what you could offer those investors is either they could get a percentage return, let's just choose 5% just to make it nice and easy per year, or they could have a couple weeks in the villa. Now, let's say you have 10 investors and you're giving them up to 2 weeks a year in the villa. Well, that ends up only being 20 weeks a year in the villa that are used up. And so what that effectively means is you still have about 32 weeks a year that you could rent out the villa, or you could use it for personal use, but you have only 20 weeks that are going to the investors. Now, what happens if an investor decides, you know what, I want to take my 5% interest this year, I'm not going to use my 2 weeks in the villa?
Sure.
Well, in that case, you could actually just give them their 5%, take those 2 weeks and go rent the villa. And that would likely, if you've done your numbers right, actually make you even more money than the 5% that you need to pay that investor. One of the things I really thought about was, as an investor going in and buying basically a couple weeks in this villa for a certain amount of time, like, I wouldn't want to deal with a lot of the details. I wouldn't want to deal with a lot of headaches. I wouldn't want to be responsible for dealing with a lot of expenses. And so when you think about it, if you made it very easy on your investors, your passive investors, and you said, listen, if you're just taking the 5%, you've got nothing to worry about for the whole year. But if you decide to take those 2 weeks in the villa, then you need to cover cleaning for those 2 weeks, and you need to cover utilities. It's not that much of a cost. There's no headaches that they have to have about the maintenance of the property, which is really one of the big headaches of having multiple properties, is all the maintenance and all the property taxes and insurance and all the other things you have to deal with. They don't have to deal with that as investors, but they're helping you cover some of the costs of their stay, because it's definitely a little bit more costly to you as the general partner, the person running the syndication, to have them staying rather than just giving them 5%. So my idea is that you would do this for a certain period of time, because I think that, as great as it is to have passive investors, for me anyway, ultimately the goal was to own this Italian villa myself. And so the idea is, let's say you did this for 4 years and each investor had 2 weeks in the spring, 2 weeks in the summer, 2 weeks in the fall, and 2 weeks in the winter. And the reason you would want to do this is because there are certain higher value times that you want to make sure that you have some openings so that you're able to have those high value renters come in and rent it as a short-term rental and bring in some of the income you're going to need to be able to pay off the investors, and also to be able to pay off all the other things that you need to pay off as the owner, which are things like property taxes, all the fees, maintenance. If there's a person on site, you're going to be paying them, landscaping, the costs go on. And if you want to make any big decisions like rehabbing a bathroom, that's another thing you would need some money for. So let's say you're renting it out, you're renting the villa for 20 weeks a year, you're renting it out for another 20 weeks on a short-term rental space, and then you're staying in it for 10 weeks a year. How amazing is that? You could actually have a property that's cash flowing as long as you purchased it correctly. And most of the down payment, if not all the down payment, was paid by passive investors who are getting to use the property themselves and have that benefit. And then the idea is, after about 4 years of doing that, because everyone has every season 2 weeks in that, you could actually buy them out. And so what you would be doing is you'd be collecting all those rents from all those short-term rentals in the meantime. And at the end, ideally, you'd be able to pay off all your investors. And so an investor would go in and put in $100,000, get paid either 5% a year, or take the 5th year, they would get their $100,000 back, plus a kicker of 5%, which my CPA said you definitely need to add that kicker percentage at the end to make it a real investment. And then they walk away and they can do it again. They can take that money and they can put it into another property that they now buy 2 weeks a year for another 4 years. And so it's a really cool way for people to be able to make a little bit of money, or stay at a really phenomenal place that they may not normally spend the money on staying. Because just thinking about, $3 million Italian villas, a lot of them rent for $20,000 to $30,000 per week. And you can imagine getting 2 weeks in that type of property. It's pretty remarkable if you get those summer weeks. And so it's kind of a lifetime experience that I think a lot of investors would be interested in. Also knowing that it's a limited period of time, it's a 4-year period, and then they can take their money and go and do it again with a different property in a totally different location.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool structure, and something that a lot of people in our community can take advantage of. And again, you can buy that property that you want, as opposed to buying a smaller property, one that you think you can afford, and instead get the property that you really want.
Now, of course, we're not CPAs and we're not legal advice. So you definitely need to run this by your own CPA and your own lawyers, which I've spent a lot of time doing myself. But I think it's a really cool model to at least plant in your head as a possibility for you if you want to look at going out and buying properties in other countries where you can't get loans, or if you don't have enough money to be able to get that loan. I want to add one other really interesting thing I've found out through all these explorations, and that's about depreciation of foreign properties. So we had heard previously from multiple CPAs, but again, check with your CPA, that if you had foreign properties that you were doing work on and you were, let's say, renting out yourself, that those would count as real estate professional hours for the US taxes. But during this process, we also found out very similarly that you can take foreign properties and you could actually depreciate them. And there's actually even accelerated depreciation. So for example, on our Italian villa that we buy sometime, we'll be able to accelerate depreciation instead of over 40 years, be able to accelerate it into 9 years. So that can be even helping your US taxes, even though the property is based in Italy. Okay, well, that's all we have for you about buying international properties. We hope that that really inspired you to see what's possible for you if you want to go out and buy a short-term rental or buy a multifamily property or get a golden visa. There are so many options available to you as a real estate investor to be able to live this life where you're spending lots of weeks in other countries and have your own rental property as well. Thanks for joining us.